I'm Julie Rand. I'm the ecology librarian at the Evanston Public Library. You're here for the Hawk Talk with Ryan DePauw from the River Trail Nature Center in Northbrook and Libby Hill. This is a co-production with the Evanston North Shore Birding Club. So I'd like to welcome everyone. We will be taking questions only in the chat. Please make sure to mute yourself and turn your video off. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Libby Hill, who will just tell you a little bit about the Evanston North Shore Bird Club.
So thanks a lot, Julie. Welcome to everybody. This is actually our second Hawk Talk with Ryan. Last time we were able to do it live. Ryan was live and the birds were live. And so now we will see Ryan virtually and whatever guests he brings with him. So it's wonderful to be working with Evanston Public Library. And so Evanston North Shore Bird Club is your go-to bird club in Evanston, local bird club. And we work on, our members work on bird safe buildings through Bird Safe Evanston. We've adopted Perkins Woods and the Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary. So we have lots of conservation projects. And we would be happy to have any of you who are not members. I'd see a bunch of our members, but any of you who are not members, you can go to just Google Evanston North Shore Bird Club, and you'll get to our website, and you can find out the programs that we offer. Not offering any field trips right now, unfortunately. So anyway, I'm going to turn this back to Julie and we'll get right started.
Thanks, Libby. So I'd just like to introduce you to Ryan. Ryan DePauw works at the River Trail Northbrook, River Trail Nature Center in Northbrook, Illinois. That's part of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. And he's been working with raptors for over 20 years and really enjoys providing an opportunity for people to see and learn about these amazing birds and get a view of them up close. So I know which birds Ryan is going to show, but you don't. So if anyone wants to take a guess, you can either write it down or you can tell someone that's watching with you. But without further ado, Ryan, please take it away. Any questions, please put them in chat. I will turn off my video now and mute myself.
Okay, so welcome everyone to our program today. I want to say thank you to Julie, thank you to Libby, thank you to the Evanston North Shore Bird Club, thank you to the Evanston Public Library. It really is a treat for us to be able to offer this program to everyone. Hopefully everything looks good sound and video wise for everyone out there. And again, if there's any comments or questions, add those to the chat. Julie will get those to me and we'll go ahead and have a chance to interact a little bit later. But I'm going to start on with our presentation. And one of the things that is a silver lining for our program today is that sometimes when we do have these programs in person, we don't always have the opportunity to give people a really close look at some of the artifacts and some of the birds that we bring to these programs. So today, I'm going to be able to bring some of these artifacts and birds right up to the camera, and hopefully it'll be a good view and you'll find it very interesting. And so without further ado, again, my name is Ryan. I'm a naturalist at River Trail Nature Center. We're part of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. Our Cook County Forest Preserves is home to over 70,000 acres. And in that land, we have 6 nature centers where we focus on teaching people about the plants and animals that are found right here in Northern Illinois. And it's my pleasure to be able to get to introduce some of my favorite types of animals to the public. And so today we're going to be learning about birds of prey. And when we talk about birds of prey, we talk about a couple different groups of raptors, and I've got some pictures I'm going to kind of show here up to the screen. But our birds of prey, or our raptors, include birds like our bald eagle. Pretty much everyone recognizes the bald eagle. Get a little bit of reflection there, but on a nice sunny day, we've got our vultures flying overhead. So we got eagles, vultures, course, in the city of Chicago and right next door to Evanston, we've got the city of Chicago's official bird, the peregrine falcon, also fastest animal on the planet, known to be able to fly at speeds over 200 miles per hour in their dive after their prey. Really, these birds are incredible. I have a picture here of a red-shouldered hawk. So far we've got our eagle, vultures, falcons, hawks, and then one of Ranger Ryan's favorite types of birds are the owls. And so here's a picture of a barn owl. Try to get it without the glare for everyone. And so that's the focus when we talk about birds of prey or raptors. And when we talk about these birds, we talk about adaptations. And this would be the point when I'm at a school or a library, I typically ask the audience for participation. And I say, what do you think an adaptation might be? Today, I'm just going to kind of go right in and answer some of those questions. You can think to yourself at home, what do you think an adaptation might be, or what have you learned about animals and adaptations? For us at the Nature Center, an adaptation is a physical or a behavioral trait that helps an animal survive in their environment. And so you can think of all sorts of amazing animals like the snowshoe hare that has white fur to help it blend into snow, or animals that have particularly unique features like the long-necked giraffes that allow them to reach higher up into the tree canopies. So many animals use adaptations to be able to survive, and that includes our birds of prey or our raptors. And I like to start out with the term raptor. Some people have heard that before, R-A-P-T-O-R, raptor. And oftentimes when we talk to our students, they think of the velociraptor. If you've seen the movie Jurassic Park, or if you've studied dinosaurs, they think of the dinosaur with the sharp claws really fast. But sometimes people have heard the term raptor in other places. If you're a basketball fan, you know the Toronto Raptors. If you study military planes, there's the F-22 jet, which is a raptor. There's all sorts of vehicles that are named after raptors. And the word, for our purposes, when it comes to describing birds of prey, when we go back to one of the origins of the word raptor, it means to seize or grab with the foot or to steal. And we have with us some feet for some birds of prey or some raptors. And these feet and the things that I show you today, the feathers, bones, the live animals, River Trail Nature Center and the Forest Preserves of Cook County has very special permission from the state and federal government to be able to show you these feathers, to possess these feathers, and use them for educational purposes. And so when we're talking about what's an adaptation, a physical or behavioral trait that help an animal survive, we talk about raptors. We talk about how that term means to seize or grab with the foot. Even though dinosaurs came a long time ago, scientists also use the name to describe birds of prey. And so to be a raptor, you got to have strong feet and sharp claws or talons. And so this is the part where I think it's really kind of neat, where it'd be difficult to pass this around for a large crowd, but here we can bring this right up to the camera and really give you a chance to look at these up close. These are the talons of a great horned owl, one of the largest owls found right here in Illinois, and they're actually common throughout most of the United States. These birds survive by catching and killing their food with their feet. So you can see how sharp those are. And so these are really, really pretty dangerous. These birds are meat eaters. They use these claws to catch things like rodents, mice, voles, shrews, squirrels and rabbits, snakes, and other birds. And to be a meat eater or a carnivore, you got to be good at catching your prey. And so to be a raptor, you got to have strong feet with sharp claws or talons. Here we have the claws of the great horned owl. I also have with me the claws or the talons of a red-tailed hawk. You can really look at that up close. Amazingly powerful claws or talons. It's interesting, these talons are kind of made out of the same stuff that your fingernails are made out of, but the way that they're formed, their thickness and their point, their curve, really make them really deadly weapons. And so if you compare these two side by side, the great horned owl claws and the red-tailed hawk claws, you'll see the red-tailed hawk looks a little bit kind of scaly, has no feathers on the toes. Our owls here have feathers that go all the way down their toes. And an interesting fact, as we're talking about these birds, now we're into November, owls are starting to get together to find their territory, and it won't be long. We'll be in January with a foot of snow on the ground, and owls will actually be sitting on eggs. And one of the reasons that they can do that is because they have feathers all the way down these toes. And so this is something that's really kind of neat and gives you a chance to be able to look at that up close. To be a bird of prey, to be a raptor, you have to have two things. One of them is the sharp claws or talons. The other thing is the beak. Now, of course, all birds have beaks. You can think of if you like watching birds and you're out at the feeder, of course, everybody knows our blue jay, you know, our cardinals. And you look at these birds, you can see their beak is thick, short, but it's a strong beak. They're definitely not birds of prey. But the point is, their beaks are an adaptation as well. Their beaks are adapted to break open seeds and nuts, just like our friend the woodpecker, whose beak is long and pointed, and in combination with a long tongue and a very tough skull, these guys are designed, their beak is designed for drilling into trees and finding beetle larvae and insects that become their food. So absolutely amazing. But to be a bird of prey, your beak has to be curved, it has to be hooked. Here we have a skull of a bald eagle, and you can kind of see the difference here. This skull and this beak is curved, it comes down to a point. So for our raptors, eagles, hawks, owls, falcons, and vultures, here we have the skull of a great horned owl. These beaks are so strong and so sharp that they can tear through flesh and even break bones. And so that's what's amazing. And again, when we talked about an adaptation in the beginning, a physical trait that helps these birds to survive, these guys have the physical trait of a curved, sharp beak. And that beak is what allows these guys to be able to tear their prey. So they catch their food with their claws or their talons. They tear off anything if the food is too big to swallow, they use the sharp beak to tear that into small pieces. And so that's the most basic thing. We're looking for raptors, we're talking about birds of prey. It's about the claws or the talons, and it's about the sharp hooked beak. That's what makes them unique from other birds, and that's how we can classify them as raptors. But there's a lot of amazing adaptations that we can learn about when we're talking about birds of prey. And as I mentioned, we have feathers and bones and things like that. And very shortly, we're going to have a special visitor that's going to come out and say hi to everyone. But before we do, we like to bring out what we call a taxidermy mount. And behind me, if any of you eagle-eyed viewers notice, we have some birds with us to take a look at. And I'm going to be showing you one of the birds that for a long time was a threatened species here in Illinois. This guy right here has become one of our more common hawks. This is a Cooper's hawk. And this Cooper's hawk has got the sharp claws, he's got the sharp hooked beak. But one of the other things that makes this bird kind of so unique is the fact that he's covered in feathers, right? You know, all birds have feathers. This guy has somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 feathers that cover his whole body. And a little bit later, if anyone is interested in talking about some of the differences, we can do this in the questions and answers. We can talk about some of the differences between the different hawks that are found right here in our area. But this bird has some amazing adaptations because of the feathers that cover its body. Another bird that's always been common. Here we have a taxidermy mount of a red-tailed hawk. Of course, this bird is named after the color of its tail. See, this is a little bit dull with age. Kind of got that red or that burnt orange color. Hopefully, as I stepped away, you could all still hear me. I'll try to get a little bit closer to the mic. And of course, Julie, if there's any issues with the sound, please let me know. The red-tailed hawk here, named after the color of his tail, is probably our largest and our most common hawk found right here in Illinois and actually most of the United States. If you're driving down a road or a highway and you see a big bird sitting on top of a telephone pole or a light pole, you're very likely looking at a red-tailed hawk. Now, when we talk about these feathers, I have with me, like I said, feathers and wings that we've gotten special permission to have. And this is the wing of a red-tailed hawk. And you can kind of see, we have these feathers that are considered primary feathers. These are the major flight feathers of our birds. Secondary feathers. There's feathers that cover those feathers. There's feathers that are downy feathers that help the bird to stay warm. So feathers play a really important role in helping these birds to survive. I usually like to have our audience discussion where we talk about how do you think feathers help our birds to survive, but I'm going to go through and answer that for some of you. And some of you, if you want to try to guess before I go ahead and tell you, how do you think a feather helps a bird to survive? Specifically, when we talk about our birds of prey or our raptors, what do the feathers do to help these animals survive? Well, of course, one of the most basic ones is feathers help birds to fly. Obviously, if our hawk or our owl is sitting on the ground, those birds can be subject to be preyed upon by other predators, maybe a fox or coyote. So the ability to fly helps them to be able to hunt and find food, but also to get to safety. So being able to fly is obviously one of the most important adaptations. And again, the ability of feathers to help a bird to fly, just like the claws and just like the beak, those are physical adaptations. One other thing that's kind of unique about the feathers is how these feathers oftentimes help a bird to blend in or to camouflage. And here I kind of have a picture. We'll see if you can find the owl that lives in this photo. Trying to get it without the glare again. And that's another great comment. Some birds have amazingly colorful feathers to attract a mate. Some birds have feathers to blend in so they don't get noticed. And right here is the body of an eastern screech owl. There's the head. And we want to see what an eastern screech owl looks like up close. You can see here we have an eastern screech owl. This is a red phase. And you can see how well this guy blends into the bark of the tree as well. Again, sharp claws, sharp hooked beak, and thousands of feathers that help this bird to survive. So I think what I'd like to do is I would like to introduce everyone to our first guest. We might as well get started. So give me one moment and I'm going to grab our special visitor. And Julie, this is a good time. If there has been a question that's popped up related to talons or beaks or feathers, you can jump in and go ahead and share that with me. This will just be 1 minute to grab our friend.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in chat and I'll relay them to Ryan. So we did have some people that mentioned there's a hawk that lives in their neighborhood. And someone else said that the feathers help them stay warm, and they give an example of peacock feathers that help them find mates because they're so colorful.
Absolutely. Those are some great observations, some great comments. And how are we doing on the sound? We doing okay?
I can hear you.
Great, fantastic. All right, everyone. I would like to take a moment to introduce you to, well, take a guess.
Anyone want to guess what kind of creature this is?
This bird here is named after these things on the top of its head that look like horns. Nice job, Kathy. This is a great horned owl. Now, great horned owls don't always look at the camera for us, but we're going to try and we'll hold him long enough so hopefully you'll have a chance to see this bird turning his head around. The great horned owl is the largest and most common owl found right here in Illinois. Right behind me here, you might be looking at our red-tailed hawk. Anywhere that you see a red-tailed hawk during the day, you might find a great horned owl at night. They're like a daytime and a nighttime counterpart. And they live in very similar habitats. Both of these birds will live in a wooded or a forested area right next to a meadow or a prairie. But these birds are very common. They're very adaptable because they're a large raptor and they eat a variety of different types of prey. They can often live in a variety of different areas. And so we think of this bird living in a forest or a forest preserve, but we also find this bird nesting in the suburbs, even in the city of Chicago and some of our parks. And I guarantee you that in Evanston and the surrounding area, there's not 1 square inch that's not part of one of these raptors' territories, be it a great horned owl, a red-tailed hawk, a screech owl, or some of the amazing raptors that we're going to learn about today. And so at River Trail Nature Center, we have a variety of different birds on display. You can come and visit the Nature Center. Our building is still currently closed due to COVID, but our grounds are open, and we're open from 8 to 4 p.m. And you can really see some amazing birds. This great horned owl, as well as a bald eagle, a red-tailed hawk, and a few other species can be found at River Trail Nature Center. These animals are housed outdoors, and you can come and visit them. These birds live with us because of an injury. They might have had an injured wing, an injured eye. Because of their injury, they can't survive in the wild. They can no longer hunt. But if we can give them a good home, they become educational ambassadors and literally help us to teach thousands of people every year. And again, in a program, I probably wouldn't have an opportunity to get close, this close with a bird to the screen, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to see if we can get a close-up view of this guy. Again, the great horned owl is named after these things that look like horns on the top of his head. Again, I'm a professional, don't try this at home. But these feathers, these things that look like horns are just feathers. They're not ears, they're not horns. Those feathers make the bird look a little bit meaner, a little bit tougher, but really that's about it. That's the big role that they play in helping this bird to survive. Again, we're talking about feathers. Feathers help birds to fly. Feathers help birds to camouflage or blend in. In some cases, feathers help birds to attract a mate. Feathers help birds to stay warm. And again, we're looking at the feet on this bird. You can see the feathers on their toes. This is a live raptor, a live bird of prey. And I do have to say, he is being quite statuesque. He's actually helping me out today by being pretty calm, which is good. He doesn't move around too much, but again, remember, our owls typically are sleeping during the day and they're awake at night. These guys are nocturnal. And so generally he gets most of his rest during the day. We wake him up for an occasional program, some visitors, or a trip to the library or local school. And he gets plenty of rest here at the Nature Center at night. So that's no problem for him to be awake right now. But this is a live bird. He came to us because he had an injured wing. His wing was broken. We don't know for sure if he flew into a window or got hit by a car, but the wing was broken. And when he was found, the only repair that they could do is to kind of stabilize the bones. There's so many ligaments and tendons in an owl's wing that oftentimes when a bone breaks, things twist, and when they heal, if they don't have a full range of motion, they can't fly well enough to hunt. And that's the case for this bird. The way that his bones healed, he can't fly well enough to hunt and protect himself in the wild. But if we can work with a bird like this, and in the beginning, he probably wouldn't be this calm, but we spend a lot of time helping these birds will trust us, that we're a source of food for them. We don't harm them in any way. And in turn, we can get a bird hopefully comfortable with us so they can be comfortable with an audience. And again, today in a room like I'm in now, I'm the only one here except for 2 birds. They actually do pretty well in front of a camera. So we're very fortunate we're able to do this. And we're very happy to be able to do that with everyone today. So thank you all again for kind of watching and tuning in. And again, please, as we're going along, if you have questions or something you think of that's pertinent to what I'm talking about, feel free to enter those into the chat and Julie will share those with me.
Ryan, I do have a couple questions
Yes.
about our owl friends.
Absolutely.
Okay, someone asked if this owl has a name.
So we do choose not to name the birds at the Nature Center. We want people to remember, unlike our our pets at home that we name, that these guys are still wild animals. And so we respect them and we're careful to not think of them as a pet. And so when we talk about this bird, we just refer to this bird as the great horned owl. There's no particular name for this guy.
Okay, and someone else wanted to know how the owl can turn his or her head all the way around.
So that's one of the things that makes owls different from our other birds of prey, what makes them kind of unique. When we look at these birds, we've got 7 bones in our neck. Owls have 14. And the combination of the extra bones, some ligaments and blood vessels that have the ability to kind of stretch, this bird has the ability to turn his head. And so we're to stretch our head, and we all practice this at home. See how far you can turn your head. In one direction, you can generally turn your head about to your shoulder. So if you got good flexibility, maybe 90 degrees or maybe a little bit more. For our owl here, right now he's kind of facing to my right, okay? And so he has the ability to turn his head 90 degrees, then 180, which he's almost at right there. And then he can continue going up to 270 degrees for about 3/4 of a circle. And those extra bones and those blood vessels and ligaments allow him to be able to turn his head like that. So he doesn't have to pick up his feet. He doesn't have to make a lot of noise to turn around to make sure no one sneaks up on him. And again, this is a bird that you can't play hide and seek with. He's always going to see you and hear you before you ever have a chance to get up close to him. And owls don't really actually turn their head that full 270 degrees. Most of the time, they'll turn their head about to 180 and then they'll flip back around and go the other way. But if they needed to or they wanted to, they could actually turn their head 270 degrees or 3/4 of a circle. And again, that's another adaptation that we're talking about today. What makes these birds unique? Those physical or behavioral traits that help them to survive. So the fact that this bird can turn its head is absolutely amazing. So we're focusing on a lot of the feathers. We can see how this guy was camouflaged. The great horned owl itself is actually nicknamed the flying tiger. And if you look and see, he's kind of has brown and black and white stripes that kind of look like tiger stripes. And that's one of the things about this guy that's unique. But we think about the flying tiger, not only does he look like a tiger, but this guy's pretty ferocious like a tiger. This guy will catch and eat just about anything that he can. So I ask people at home to think about what a great horned owl's favorite food might be. If you remember from before, we talked about these birds being raptors, being meat eaters or carnivores. Owls, like a great horned owl, typically eat a lot of mammals, things that are slower and easier for them to catch. So this bird would typically eat a mouse, a rat, a squirrel, a rabbit. Or if you want to know what I think a great horned owl's favorite food is, I would say skunk. And when we learn about these birds, and I saw some comments, yes, these guys have amazing eyesight, they have amazing hearing, but they have little or no sense of smell. So this is one of the few birds that's big enough and strong enough to actually catch and eat skunks. Absolutely amazing. Now, I don't know for sure if skunks are their favorite food, but they are one of the few animals that do eat skunks. And so that's pretty amazing. They have little or no sense of smell. Most of us have heard at some point in time, if you find a baby bird, don't pick it up because the mother will smell your scent and won't take it back. And in most cases, that's not true. Most birds have little or no sense of smell. These birds are great parents. Of course, we don't want to intervene with wildlife generally, but if we do find a baby bird, we can usually put it back up in the nest and mom would take it right back. And so absolutely amazing. They don't have much of a sense of smell, but again, as you see this bird turning its head, you can see those really big eyes. And I usually like to share a picture of a screech owl. Again, we saw a screech owl earlier today, and a picture of another owl that's found in Evanston, the saw-whet owl. Now this picture is really big, but the bird itself only stands about 5 or 6 inches tall. And when you look at the pictures of the screech owl or the saw-whet owl, you take a look at the great horned owl, you'll see those large eyes really are one of their big features. And if we take a look at the skull of the great horned owl that I had earlier, take a look at the eye and how much space the eye takes out of the whole skull. Their eyes and all their parts take up as much as 70% of that skull. And having those large eyes is common with a lot of nocturnal animals. They use large eyes to collect the light from the stars, the light from the moon, or even the light from our cities, and to be able to hunt. We could take a football field, make it completely dark, and light one candle. And just one candle can produce enough light for our owls to be able to hunt at night. Absolutely amazing. See, the back of our eyes have certain cells called rods and cones. And in owls, they have a lot of rods. And the rod cells is what takes in that light and it gives them that ability to see in the dark. Absolutely amazing. We'll try to get them up close again a little bit here. And as you look at the great horned owl, you might see that there's feathers, a circle of feathers around this bird's eyes. The circle of feathers around his eyes, they don't actually help him to see. The feathers that are around his eyes actually give him that amazing sense of hearing. And I believe someone had pointed that out or mentioned that in the comments. If I were to, you can't see the ears on this bird because they're actually underneath his feathers. But if I were to, right here where the black line is, if I were to take those feathers and lift them forward, there'd be a big flap of skin, and underneath that, you would see one ear. On one side of his head, the ear is a little bit higher. On the other side of his head, the ear is a little bit lower. And the fact that his ears are asymmetrical, or they're in slightly different positions on the head, also gives this bird an amazing sense of hearing. So we've got the claws, we've got the sharp hooked beak, thousands of feathers that play a really important role in helping this bird to survive. And on top of that, we have amazing eyesight and amazing hearing. So you would think that this guy is just an absolute killing machine. But you know what? Life still isn't always easy for these birds. Even with their amazing adaptations, it's hard for them sometimes to survive. And unfortunately, a lot of the mortality for these birds actually comes from humans. A bird like this might die from landing on power lines and becoming electrocuted. We mentioned being hit by a car, flying into a window, or even eating a mouse that's been poisoned by someone trying to get rid of mice. You see our owls here, if we could let them do the job getting rid of mice, I think the world would be a better place. These guys are nature's pest control. You know, every animal is important, but sometimes if we have too many of one type of animal, like too many mice, they can spread disease or damage our crops, our gardens. Well, guess what? Owls are working 365 days a year, eating as many mice as they can catch. And that actually helps keep a balance in nature so there's not too many mice. They're like a farmer's best friend, and they help us out too by controlling the rodent populations. Now, some of us, as I've been talking, you've noticed this guy doing some fluttering with his neck. And so I'll go ahead and comment on that now since he has been doing that. This guy spends pretty much all of his time outdoors at River Trail Nature Center. And outside right now, it's probably, I believe it's in the 40 degrees or so. So it's kind of cool outside. And we brought him inside where it's a little bit warmer. So in the summertime, if you've ever seen your dog or another dog stick out its tongue and pant, dogs are naturally cooling themselves off in that way. The same way that our owl, if he's a little bit warm, will open his mouth, stick out his tongue, and by moving his throat back and forth, it's his natural air conditioning. So when you see him moving his throat, that's actually a sign of him cooling off. And that's natural because it's a little bit warmer in here than he would be used to outside. It's also a good opportunity for Ranger Ryan to grab the water bottle and give him a fresh drink. Of course, it's important for everyone to stay hydrated, so make sure that you stay hydrated at home. And we give our owl a little bit of water, even though most of the water that these guys get actually get from their food and the blood and the water that's inside the prey that they eat. So they usually don't drink much water, but kind of a neat time for me to be able to do that. And we were lucky enough to hear our great horned owl. Of course, the great horned owl actually has one of the most common or one of the most recognizable calls. If you're watching a TV show or a movie at night and you hear an owl hooting in the background, it's almost always the call of a great horned owl. That typical call. It's the call that most of us will recognize. But here in Illinois, we actually have 8 different species of owls. And each one of those species kind of has its own sound. It's a little bit hard for me to kind of make that sound with a bird on my glove. We'll see if he'll tolerate it for a little bit. He just kind of needed to stretch his wings. So the great horned owl, as I mentioned, is one of the largest owls found right here in Illinois. Pardon me while I wet my whistle. This is one of the largest owls found in Illinois, but owls come in all shapes and sizes. And one of the smallest owls in Illinois, like the saw-whet owl, this is kind of a neat time to talk about how do we identify these birds. For an animal that's out at night, for an animal that can fly silently, for an animal that's camouflaged so well, a lot of us don't have a chance to see owls up close. But if you're lucky at night, you can sometimes hear the call that they make. The great horned owl, again, kind of like a the saw-whet owl kind of sounds like an old tool called a wet saw, kind of like a toot, toot, toot. Our little screech owl here actually sounds like a horse. The screech owl has a whinny, which is kind of like a or a trill call, which is more like a. And if I turn the screen just a little bit, you'll see up here, let's see if I can show it to you. There we go. Up here is another taxidermy bird, a barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D. And barred owls are known to have a call that sounds like they're saying, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? So it sounds a little bit like a, who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? So a lot of amazing sounds. And after you learn a little bit about these birds and kind of how unique and how amazing they are, you can kind of understand why so many myths and legends and folklore surround some of our birds of prey, especially our owls, because they are so unique, sometimes strange in some ways, but they really are these magnificent creatures. And it's just a pleasure to be able to work with these birds and give people an opportunity to see them up close. But I don't want to monopolize our time just with this bird because it happens to be one of Ranger Ryan's favorites. We do have another visitor we'd like to show, and there's a few more artifacts I'm going to show you. So I'm going to take a second to put him into his carrier. And again, Julie, if you want to jump back in with any comments or questions.
I have a couple questions that came in, Ryan.
Okay.
So if you can hear me, someone asked about the wingspan of the great horned owl and also what their life expectancy is and whether or not they have any predators.
Sure. So this is a bird that's got a pretty good wingspan, up to about 5 feet. And as far as the lifespan goes, there's very few predators for our owls. They're typically at the top of the food chain. As a raptor, a bird of prey, these guys are the hunters. Occasionally, if a great horned owl soars off its perch down off of a tree onto its prey, if it stays on the ground, it might be prey to something like a fox or coyote. But again, there's very few predators for our owls. They're generally at the top of the food chain. Their highest level of mortality is usually due to humans. In the wild, a large owl like a great horned owl typically would live 12 to 15 years. In captivity, a bird like this could live to be as much as 25 or 30 years old. And again, in captivity, we can give these guys a good home, good medical or vet care, and obviously plenty of food. So they get good attention while they're here at the Nature Center. A lot of these birds tend to have longer lifespans in captivity. So I think, did that answer those questions? Generally a 5-foot wingspan. The thing that I didn't have a chance to show up close, I wanted to really kind of focus on the feathers a little bit more earlier, is that owls, their feathers are different than a lot of our other birds. And we got an owl wing here, and you can see how well this bird is kind of camouflaged. The different colors and patterns would help this bird to blend in. And one of the things that's unique about this is I come up here to the camera, you'll see what looks like a fringe. It's kind of fuzzy looking. See if I can hold it steady. And if you can see that fringe on the edge of the feather, that's what makes our owls so unique. And this is a demonstration that we would normally do in the classroom. But if we were to take the wing of an owl and flap it, because of that softened edge of the feathers, this bird would make little or almost no sound in flight. Another amazing adaptation that helps our owls to be able to survive. If we were to take the wing of a red-tailed hawk, you would see that it's a much more solid edge, or even the feather of a vulture. And so when we take a feather like that, and again, you probably can't hear that at home, but the sound of our hawks, our vultures, our eagles, our falcons, all of their feathers, they make some sort of sound. There's a little bit of drag when these birds are flying, but our owls can fly almost completely silently, which really is pretty cool. A neat adaptation to be able to find these guys, to see these guys in the wild and how they can survive. Just absolutely amazing. I talked a little bit about how we might find an owl. At night, as a nocturnal animal, we can listen for the sound that these guys make, the different hooting calls of the owl, but we can also look for evidence that these guys leave behind. Now, of course, all of our birds, they typically have a tree or a spot they like to roost in. They'll spend a lot of time, and one of the ways to identify birds is to look for their droppings, and the droppings of our birds of prey look kind of like white paint or whitewash. And so if you're walking through the forest and you see a lot of white at the bottom of a tree or running down the trunk of a tree, make sure that you take some time to look up, because you might be looking at a place that a bird spends a lot of time. We also can look for these little guys and see if anybody at home knows what this might be. An artifact left behind by a bird of prey. Any guesses out there? Casting. Okay. What's amazing about these birds, like I said, these guys are meat eaters. They're carnivores. So when they eat a mouse or they eat a squirrel or a rabbit, they typically eat the entire thing. They eat the fur, they eat the bones, they eat the tail, they even eat the brains. And that all goes down into their stomach. And sometimes the parts of their food that's hard to digest, like the bones and sometimes the fur, get formed into a pellet, which is kind of like a fur ball, and they actually cough it up. They regurgitate it. Exactly. And if you're walking through the woods and you find a bunch of pellets at the bottom of the tree, definitely take some time to look up. And after you're done looking up for a hawk or an owl that's been in that area, you can take one of those pellets, you can start to dissect it, and if you're lucky, you can find things inside of their pellet, like the skull or the jawbone of a rat. And so when we take a look and we find a rat like this, it may be hard to study owls in nature because they're nocturnal, they're out at night, but we can look for different things. We can study the things that they leave behind, and scientists can still learn a lot about these animals. So pellets are a great way to identify your local birds of prey. A lot of people associate pellets with owls because they'll produce a pellet every single day, but actually all of our raptors produce pellets. Our hawks, falcons, eagles, vultures, they'll produce pellets as well. And so they just don't produce them quite as often as the owls do. How are we doing, Julie?
Good. We have one other question that came in.
Okay.
You had mentioned saw-whet owls living in our area.
Mhm.
And you may have heard about the story of the little saw-whet owl that was in the evergreen tree at Rockefeller Center.
Sure.
And the tree came from, I think it was Oneka, New York. So one of our participants asked if saw-whet owls are also common in New York State.
Sure. So that's one for our birders out there. A lot of times it's good to always carry a field guide with you to kind of give you some of the basic information. My focus is really on birds of kind of the Midwest region, but I'm pretty sure saw-whet owls are found all the way to the Atlantic coast. And they're a bird that's more typical to a forest dwelling. I mentioned that we have great horned owls and red-tailed hawks living in a forest, but it's typically next to an open field or a big meadow or prairie. The thing about saw-whet owls is they tend to like a more coniferous forest. Lots of trees, not as much space between the trees, a lot of evergreens, in areas where there's not a lot of human traffic. And so where you might find a great horned owl or red-tailed hawk in your neighborhood or your backyard, it's a little bit less common to find a saw-whet owl in an urban area, though it is still, possible. So it must have been quite a shock for that bird to be able to be transplanted to the Rockefeller Center. The saw-whet owl is the smallest owl that's found in the United States. And I'm going to bring out the smallest falcon for all of you to see. If anyone wants to take a guess, feel free to do so before our next visitor comes out. Okay. Just 1 second. She's got a little bit of food left on her leash. Okay, great. So this bird is related to a peregrine falcon. Again, peregrine falcons, the official city bird of Chicago, the fastest animal on the planet. Consider this bird like a cousin of the peregrine falcon. This bird is the American kestrel. And don't let size fool you. This bird is a dangerous predator. Even at only about 8 inches, maybe 9 inches with head to tail, this bird still is known for having sharp claws or talons, a very sharp hooked beak, the thousands of feathers that we talked about. And again, generally, even though this bird is not nocturnal, this bird has an amazing sense of eyesight. And when we take a look at this bird up close, American kestrels, there's something unique about the way that these birds can see. A lot of our raptors can see very well. If you imagine that football field earlier that we talked about, in that football field, we lit one candle and that was enough light to be able, for an owl to be able to hunt. Well, if you were to take that same football field, but just put it during the daytime, you were to stand at one end of that football field reading a book from your library, and you were to stand at the other side of the field with the American kestrel, this bird could probably read the title of your book from the other side of the field. That's, of course, if birds could read. But this bird has amazing eyesight. And the way that their eyes are shaped, kind of like tubes, kind of like binoculars, they have this amazing binocular vision. They can see things that are really far away. They can almost see things, it's hard to explain, but almost faster than we can. These birds need to interpret what they see very quickly and move very quickly when they hunt. And one of the things that's also amazing about this bird, whereas the owls can kind of take in light and be able to see at night, this bird's vision actually includes somewhat of they go beyond our full spectrum of light. And so what happens with American kestrel is this bird is flying and looking down at a field when it may be hunting, they can actually see urine trails that are left by mice that are invisible to our human eye. But their eyesight is so amazing they can see the trails that mice or rodents leave behind, and that assists them in their hunting. And so this bird may not fly at 200 miles an hour in a dive after its prey, but one of the things that she can do is she can flap her wings fast enough that she can actually hover. Of course, there's very few birds that do hover. We think of hummingbirds typically as our birds that hover. But some birds of prey have mastered the art of flying into the wind and kind of keeping themselves steady, almost like a kite in the wind. But these birds can actually hover over a field while flapping their wings as they're hunting. And so this bird is another amazing hunter. Don't let the size fool you. Again, sharp claws and a beak so strong, it'll tear through meat and even break bones. With most of our raptors, people oftentimes want to know if I'm talking to them. Sometimes I'll use a pronoun he or she. Most of these birds, the boys and girls, look exactly the same. I know with some of our other birds, we think of the very colorful birds like the male peacock or the male cardinal. Sorry about that. Those birds have the colorful feathers to attract a mate. For birds of prey, the males and females are generally the same color. Their coloration of feathers is usually more to do with camouflage or blending into their environment. But there are 3 species found in Illinois that have some differences in color, and that includes 2 falcons. One of them is the American kestrel, the other one is the merlin, and then the third bird is the northern harrier. The males are considered the gray ghost, that's a nickname, and the females have more of a brown color to them. And so there's a few different colors, and even with her difference in color, this one is a female. You can see she's got a little bit of gray-blue color on the cap of her head, whereas the males would have that gray-blue extending down the back of their head and into their wings. And where she's got stripes on her tail, a male would have a solid brown tail with 1 black bar at the very bottom. So the females have stripes on their tail. The males just have a bar at the bottom without the stripes above. The males have a lot more of the gray-blue color that goes onto the back of their head and onto their wings. So if you're trying to identify a male from a female kestrel, those are some of the things to look for. One of the things that you can look for, because this is a small bird, just identifying that you're looking at a raptor and not something like a robin or another bird, is when this bird's sitting on my glove, you might notice her moving her tail and moving her head. And one of the things that she does is she moves her tail. They'll oftentimes do that if they're excited or if they're balancing. So as you drive down the road and you see a bird on a power line, if you see that tail bobbing, you could be looking at an American kestrel, and then the head bobbing. And that's part of them focusing on things in the distance. And when they're sitting on a tree branch or a power line and that's moving in the wind, they'll bob their head up and down to focus on something, or as their body moves, sometimes they'll keep their head perfectly still. Let's see if she'll do that for us. Oh, I think you can see that. The head staying still while the body moves, which is kind of a fun thing. But anyways, these birds have an amazing sense of eyesight. They can see things really far away. They have that unique ability where they're bobbing their head. They bob their tail when they're excited. And as far as natural history goes, a little bit about this bird. They are a hunter. These guys will hunt a lot of insects, grasshoppers, and dragonflies, a lot of rodents, mice, voles, and shrews. But because they are so fast, they can even hunt other birds. And that's typical of a lot of our falcons. We have a really fast flyer here. Someone mentioned or asked what was the nature of her injury. For this particular bird, this is a great example. For her physically, she's a perfect specimen. There's almost nothing wrong with her. This is the way an American kestrel would look in the wild. Unfortunately, she fell out of her nest when she was just a few days old. And for these birds, and for most animals, if they're raised by people, they're raised by humans just like you or me, they never learn how to be a wild animal. They don't learn how to hunt and how to survive. They don't have the natural instincts. And so an animal that's been raised in captivity because they've fallen out of a nest and they can't be returned, unfortunately, those animals depend on people for food. They're not afraid of people, and that becomes a problem for their survival in the wild. And so it's good for us in the sense that she can live here at the Nature Center, and it's not stressful to be around visitors and staff. She actually seeks out her socialization with humans, not with other birds. And so for her, unfortunately, she can't go back out in the wild. But again, we can give her a good home, and she's a great ambassador for these birds and the role that they play in nature. And so again, that's a lot of talking. I've been kind of spitting through all that, but Julie, I think I saw a couple questions pop up that I didn't have a chance to answer.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Someone asked how old that kestrel is, and I'm curious how long they live.
Sure. And so getting into the lifespan, again, the bigger the bird, generally the longer that they live. Our great horned owl, you remember, might live 12 to 15 years in the wild, as much as 25 or 30 years in captivity. One of our smallest birds, kind of a thing of high metabolism, high energy, doesn't tend to live as long. They also have more potential predators. This bird, if I remember correctly, she came to us in 2016, so she's about 4 years old now. In the wild, a kestrel might only live 3 to 5 years, and that would be about it. In captivity, she may live to be as many as 15 years. So we hope that she's got a good long life here at the Nature Center, and again, helps us to teach people about the role these play in nature. She's being a little bit of a, a silly bird here for a second, just chewing. For anyone that's curious, when we are working with these birds, we use a soft leather. They have a leather bracelet and a leather jess, and that's part of the equipment that I hold on to. It's falconry equipment. And I had given her a mouse a little bit earlier today. She's got some extra food on her equipment, and she's kind of cleaning things up a little bit right now. So thank you, Julie, for that question. Did we have a follow-up to that one?
Yeah, there were two others, one about the kestrel. This
Yes.
person asked if the black on her face is adaptive, like to reduce glare or something.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a particular study that's shown that. I need to do a little bit more research on the falcons, but I know that we think of the black, the eye black that's used in professional sports with football players and baseball players, and that helps as far as reflections from the sun and being able to perform. And I think that is very reasonable to assume that kind of plays the same way with our falcons. A lot of our falcons, the Merlin, the Peregrine, the American Kestrel, one of the ways that they're identified from other birds of prey, like an owl or a hawk or a vulture, is they've got that black marking. Some people call it the mustache marking or the teardrop that comes underneath their eye. And so that's one of the ways to identify her. And one of the other things that's unique, and it's hard to see for a bird like this, but they've got a really unique beak. Not only is their beak curved or hooked like a raptor would be, but the top mandible of their beak on the underside or the inside of the mouth has a notch. And what that notch does is it makes this bird an efficient killer. Some of our birds, they catch their prey with their claws or their talons and they just start eating. What a falcon does that makes them kind of so efficient is they catch their food with their feet, but immediately can dispatch their prey so it doesn't struggle. They take their beak and the notch of their beak and they grab onto the spine of their prey, and they immediately can sever the spine and kill their prey. And because of that, in the falconry world and going back to ancient medieval times, these birds were highly regarded. Like who you were in society, if you were a lord or an earl, a king, or a knight, who you were was reflected by oftentimes the bird that you flew. So the biggest birds like the eagles might be reserved for the king and queen. Falcons would be highly regarded for the knights and for the earls. And so having a bird like this known as a very fast flyer, an efficient hunter, it was a status symbol in society for a long time. And so that's one of the things that also kind of makes this bird a little interesting, a little bit of history there. Oh.
There was one other question about the kestrel, and that was, how do its feet hold on to things?
How do the feet hold on to things? Well, they've got the same claws and talons that the other birds do, but they're just smaller. And trust me, those little tiny talons there, let's see. I can get that up to the camera. She's holding on, and those talons are sharp, and they continually grow. In the wild, her talons and her beak would kind of naturally be worn down from catching and killing her prey and from sitting on perches. Sometimes in captivity, we find that we have to trim their talons and their beak a little bit throughout the year just to make sure that they don't get too long or too sharp. But yeah, their talons are always growing. They're sharp and they're very good at holding on to things.
What are the claws and the talons made of? Are they cartilage or?
So the talons, the black part of the talon that we look at, like when we look at the feet here, the black part, that's the nail, and that's just like the same keratin that would be in our fingernails. So what you see here, it's just it's put together in a different way, in a different shape, but that the black part of the talon is just like our fingernails, same type of material. As far as the rest of the foot, that's just kind of a scaly skin. They've got ligaments and they've got bones inside of their feet, just like we do. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yep. And someone else asked if hawks have teeth.
So no teeth on these birds. They just have a beak, and the beak is actually similar to the talons in terms of what it's made out of, the material. And the anything that they catch, they try to swallow whole. And if they can't swallow it whole, the beak tears it into a small enough piece that they can swallow, and there's no chewing involved at all. They just tear, and it goes right down into the stomach.
And then someone also asked how we can help raptors in our communities.
Great, and that's an excellent question, and that's one of the ways that we usually tie things together towards the end of the program as we talk about that role again that these animals play in nature. You know, these guys are hunters, they're nature's pest control. They help keep a balance in nature, and the more diversity we have, the better off it is. And so having a variety of different animals, having a variety of different species is good and healthy. Unfortunately, sometimes for these birds, if their habitat is affected, if there's less habitat for a bird, in the case of American kestrels, the way that would apply is where you find this bird's nesting. And now when I talk about kestrels, these birds are cavity nesters. And for anyone that gets a little bit nervous hearing the word cavity and thinks the dentist office, a cavity is also a hole in something. So typically a hole in a tree is a great spot for a cavity nester like an American kestrel or an eastern screech owl. And unfortunately, sometimes when trees have cavities in them, people are more likely to cut them down if they're concerned about the tree falling or landing on property or doing some sort of damage. So if you have a tree that you can't leave up because of some of the cavities or potential for damage in the tree, you can actually build nest boxes for some of our cavity nesters. And so the American kestrel population over the last few decades has been slowly declining, and there's still kind of the jury is out with scientists as to exactly what the reason is. Part of the thoughts with some of the biologists here in the forest preserve is that there are less suitable nesting habitats than there used to be. And so if we're building boxes, building cavities for these birds and put those out, that's one of the ways that we can help. Again, not using pesticides. If we have a rodent or a mouse problem, not using pesticides or herbicides to kill the animals, because we don't want our kestrels and our owls eating mice that have been poisoned, because in turn that can poison them and affect them. So just kind of being more conscious about protecting our forest preserves, protecting our wildlife, and you can even build homes for these birds. And those are all ways that you can help these guys in the wild.
And how likely is it for someone to see a kestrel? And how common are they in our area? And are their populations declining also in Illinois?
Right, so the populations in Illinois are declining, but they are still, if we were to look at the list, when they refer to birds, we think of bird, is it uncommon, common, is it endangered, is it threatened? And so there's different statuses for these birds. And American kestrels, I believe, are still considered a common species. Birds of prey by their nature have larger territories, and so you're not going to see an American kestrel every time you drive down the road. But if the habitat is right, and you've got kind of large open fields nearby, meadows and prairies and places where a bird like this would hunt and find food, on a good sunny day, you might expect to be able to see one of these birds if you do a little bit of driving around or you visit some of those types of habitats. Now, whereas our owls are year-round residents of this area, and we can find an owl pretty much all the time if you know what to look for. American kestrels and some of our other birds of prey are migrators. And so when it starts to get cold, we get towards the end of summer, we get into fall, some of our birds, like our falcons, are actually flying south. And these guys are flying down to Florida or Texas. Some of our birds, like here at the Nature Center, we have a Swainson's hawk that would be known to fly all the way to Argentina. And so in the fall, these birds would fly south, and every spring they would fly back north to their habitat. So you wouldn't see them all the time year round. You're more likely to see these birds when they're active spring and summer here in this area. So hopefully that answers that question. You got to hear a little bit of what an American kestrel sounds like. They're called, typically people say it sounds like they say kitty, 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 kitty. And she's probably asking for a little bit more food right now. I know she's been watching my hand a lot. And so she is very kind of food motivated, we'll put it that way. All right, Julie, what else?
Does anyone else have any other questions about kestrels in particular, or hawks perhaps?
Mhm.
So I'm waiting.
Okay, so again, I just kind of reiterate for everyone, River Trail Nature Center is in Northbrook, Illinois. We're part of the Forest Preserves of Cook County. You can come and visit the Nature Center. Our building is closed, but our grounds are still open. And outside, you can see some of our hawks, our owls. We have a coyote and an eagle that you can come and visit. Or you can check out our Facebook page for River Trail Nature Center and see some other videos about things like snakes and turtles and some of our local native wildlife. I'm glad that everyone had the opportunity to join us today, and hopefully you enjoyed learning about these birds. There's always something I forgot to say, and we're always happy to answer more questions in the chat. Or you can always send us an email, and we're happy to talk raptors and what makes these birds so special and so unique.
Ryan,
Yes.
someone asked, how does the lake impact the kind of birds we find in Evanston?
So as far as the birds along Evanston and being kind of along the lakeshore, absolutely. The best time of year to see the most variety of birds is going to be in our fall migration. So as we get into late September and October, a lot of birds that are migrating or flying south, they use major waterways as they're flying south. And so they hit the Mississippi River, they hit a series of mountains, or in our case, they hit the lakefront. As birds are migrating and flying south, they're using the lakefront, they're using that water source as kind of a highway for their travel south. And so being in Evanston, there's some amazing places to kind of see birds along the lakefront, and to be able to see a variety of different birds. And so all animals need water. You being near the water, what I think that does is it allows you to see birds that commonly would be found in the water, as well as birds that naturally live in the area. Sorry about that. And so I think you just get a better variety being along the lakefront. Hopefully she's not making too much sound into the microphone.
Ryan, this is Libby.
Yes.
I pointed out that on October 1st, a kestrel was found at Clark Street Beach Bird Sanctuary, which is a good place along the lake. It's a good place to look for any of these birds.
Great, thank you.
And
Yeah, just to add to that, Libby, anything you wanted to add for that is the Evanston North Shore Bird Club, I'm sure, is a great resource if you're interested in getting more into birds and learning about bird watching. The Evanston Public Library, absolutely amazing. Thank you for also having us. And I'm sure that there's a lot of amazing field guides and books and texts that you can read that you can check out at the library to learn more about these birds as well.
also, Ryan, you mentioned that you have a number of raptors that people can see.
Yes.
So you said that you've got the kestrel and the great horned owl. And what are the other raptors that you have?
So you can also see a Swainson's hawk. We have a red-tailed hawk. We have a bald eagle. We have a barred owl. And did I get everyone? We have a screech owl. The screech owl and the American kestrel are indoors, so they're not currently on display. So actually, this is the best chance to see our American kestrel right now is through this virtual program.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. And thank you everyone for attending our program, and Libby for working with the library. As Ryan said, we do have lots of different resources at the library that you can check out: books, field guides, videos, etc. Also, if anyone is interested in proposing future programs, I am the ecology librarian. So if you're specifically interested in us, the library, doing a program, either about birds or gardening or the environment or anything like that, let me know. I'm hoping to put together a program about bats next year. So maybe Ryan will have to talk. So
Sounds good.
thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Julie and Ryan. This is great.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Bye, Kestrel.